The following is a conversation with Elon Musk, his fourth time on the Lex Fridman Podcast. I thought you were going to finish it. It's one of the greatest themes in all of film history.
Yeah, that's great.
So I was just thinking about the Roman Empire, as one does.
There's that whole meme where old guys are thinking about the Roman Empire at least once a day.
And half the population is confused whether it's true or not. But more seriously, thinking about the wars going on in the world today. And as you know, war and military conquest has been a big part of Roman society and culture. And I think has been a big part of most empires and dynasties throughout human history. So
yeah, they usually came as a result of conquest. I mean, there's some like the Austro-Hungarian Empire where there was just a lot of sort of clever marriages.
But fundamentally, there's an engine of conquest. And they celebrate excellence in warfare. Many of the leaders were excellent generals. Yeah, that kind of thing. So, big picture question. Grok approved. I asked if this is a good question to ask.
Kid tested, Grok approved?
Yeah. At least on fun mode. To what degree do you think war is part of human nature versus a consequence of how human societies are structured? I ask this as you have somehow controversially been a proponent of peace.
I'm generally a proponent of peace. I mean, ignorance is perhaps, in my view, the real enemy to be countered. That's the real hard part, not, fighting other humans. But all creatures fight. I mean, the jungle is you look at people think of this nature as perhaps some sort of peaceful thing, but in fact, it is not. There's some quite funny Werner Herzog thing where he's like in the jungle, like saying that it's like basically just murder and death in every direction. Mm-hmm. I mean, the plants and animals in the jungle are constantly trying to kill and eat each other every single day, every minute. So it's not like, we're unusual in that respect.
Well, there's a relevant question here, whether with greater intelligence comes greater control over these base instincts for violence.
Yes. We have much more of an ability to control our limbic instinct for violence than, say, a chimpanzee. And in fact, if one looks at, say, chimpanzee society, it is not friendly. I mean, the bonobos are an exception. But chimpanzee society is filled with violence, and it's quite horrific, frankly. That's our limbic system in action. Like, you don't want to be on the wrong side of a chimpanzee. It'll eat your face off and tear your nuts off.
Yeah, basically, there's no limits or ethics or... the Romans had just war. There's no just war in chimpanzee societies. Is war and dominance by any means necessary?
Yeah, chimpanzee society is like a primitive version of human society. They're not like peace loving, basically, at all. There's extreme violence, and then once in a while, somebody who's watched too many Disney movies decides to raise a chimpanzee as a pet, and then that eats their face or rips their nuts off or chews their fingers off, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's happened several times.
Ripping your nuts off is an interesting strategy for interaction.
It's happened to people. It's unfortunate. Like that's, I guess, one way to ensure that the other chimp doesn't, contribute to the gene pool.
Well, from a martial arts perspective, it's a fascinating strategy.
the nut ripper.
I wonder which of the martial arts teaches that.
I think it's safe to say if somebody's got your nuts in their hands and has the option of ripping them off, you will be amenable to whatever they want.
Yeah, safe to say. So, like I said, somehow controversially, you've been a proponent of peace on Twitter, on X.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about the wars going on today and to see what the path to peace could be. How do you hope the current war in Israel and Gaza comes to an end? What path do you see that can minimize human suffering in the long term in that part of the world?
Well, I think that that part of the world is definitely like if you look up there is no easy answer in the dictionary. It'll be that like the picture of the Middle East, in Israel especially. So there is no easy answer. Or what this is strictly my opinion of is that the goal of Hamas was to provoke an overreaction from Israel. They obviously do not expect to, have a military victory, but they really wanted to commit the worst atrocities that they could in order to provoke the most aggressive response possible from Israel, and then leverage that aggressive response to rally Muslims worldwide for the cause of Gaza and Palestine, which they have succeeded in doing. So the counterintuitive thing here, I think that the thing that I think should be done, even though it is very difficult, is that I would recommend that Israel engage in the most conspicuous acts of kindness possible. Everything. That is the actual thing that would thwart the goal of Hamas.
So in some sense, the degree that makes sense in geopolitics, turn the other cheek, implemented.
It's not exactly turn the other cheek, because I do think that there's, I think it is appropriate for Israel to find the Hamas members and, either kill them or incarcerate them. Like that something has to be done because they're just going to keep coming otherwise. But in addition to that, they need to do whatever they can. There's some talk of establishing, for example, a mobile hospital. I'd recommend doing that. Just making sure that there's food, water, medical necessities, and just be over the top about it and be very transparent, so that people can't claim it's a trick. Like just put a webcam on the thing, all 24/7.
Deploy acts of kindness.
Yeah, conspicuous acts of kindness that are unequivocal, meaning they can't be somehow, because Hamas will then their response will be, "Oh, it's a trick." Mm-hmm. Therefore, you have to counter how is it not a trick.
This ultimately fights the broader force of hatred in the region.
Yes. And I'm not sure who said it. It's an apocryphal saying, but an eye for an eye makes everyone blind. Now that neck of the woods, they really believe in the whole eye for an eye thing. But I mean, you really have, if you're not going to just outright commit genocide, like against an entire people, which obviously would not be acceptable to really shouldn't be acceptable to anyone, then you're going to leave basically a lot of people alive who subsequently, hate Israel. So really the question is like, how, for every Hamas member that you kill, how many did you create? Mm-hmm. And if you create more than you killed, you've not succeeded. That's the real situation there. And it's safe to say that if you kill somebody's child in Gaza, you've made at least a few Hamas members who will die just to kill an Israeli. That's the situation. So, but I mean, this is one of the most contentious subjects one could possibly discuss. But I think if the goal ultimately is some sort of long-term peace, one has to look at this from the standpoint of, over time, are there more or fewer terrorists being created?
Let me just linger on war.
Yeah, well, war. It's safe to say wars always existed and always will exist.
Always will exist.
Always has existed and always will exist.
I hope not. You think it always will?
There will always be war. There's a question of just how much war, and what there's the sort of the scope and scale of war. Mm-hmm. But to imagine that there would not be any war in the future, I think would be a very unlikely outcome.
Yeah, you talked about the culture series. There's war even there.
Yes. It's a giant war. The first book starts off with a gigantic galactic war where trillions die. Trillions.
But it still nevertheless protects these pockets of flourishing. Somehow you can have galactic war and still have pockets of flourishing.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I guess if we are able to one day expand to, fill the galaxy or whatever, there will be a galactic war at some point.
The scale. I mean, the scale of war has been increasing. It's like a race between the scale of suffering and the scale of flourishing.
Yes.
A lot of people seem to be using this tragedy to beat the drums of war and feed the military-industrial complex. Do you worry about this? The people who are rooting for escalation, and how can it be stopped?
One of the things that does concern me is that there are very few people alive today who actually viscerally understand the horrors of war, at least in the U.S. I mean, obviously there are people on the front lines in Ukraine and Russia who understand just how terrible war is. But how many people in the West understand it? My grandfather was in World War II. He was severely traumatized. He was there, I think, for almost 6 years in East and North Africa and Italy. All his friends were killed in front of him, and he would have died too, except they randomly gave some, I guess, IQ test or something, and he scored very high. Now, he was not an officer. He was, I think, a corporal or a sergeant or something like that, because he didn't finish high school. Because he had to drop out of high school because his dad died, and he had to work to support his siblings. So because he didn't graduate high school, he was not eligible for the officer corps. So, he kind of got put into the cannon fodder category, basically. But then, randomly, they gave him this test. He was transferred to British intelligence in London. That's where he met my grandmother. But he had PTSD next level. I mean, just didn't talk. And if you tried talking to him, he'd just tell you to shut up. And he won a bunch of medals. Never bragged about it once. Not even hinted. Nothing. I found out about it because his military records are online. That's how I know. So he would say no way in hell do you want to do that again. But how many people? Now he obviously he died 20 years ago or longer, actually 30 years ago. How many people are alive that remember World War II? Not many.
And the same perhaps applies to the threat of nuclear war.
Yeah, I mean, there are enough nuclear bombs pointed at the United States to make the radioactive rubble bounce many times.
There's two major wars going on right now. So you talked about the threat of AGI quite a bit, but now, as we sit here with the intensity of conflict going on, do you worry about nuclear war?
I think we shouldn't discount the possibility of nuclear war. It is a civilizational threat. Right now, I could be wrong, but I think the current probability of nuclear war is quite low. But there are a lot of nukes pointed at us. So, and we have a lot of nukes pointed at other people. They're still there. Nobody's put their guns away. The missiles are still in the silos.
And the leaders don't seem to be the ones with the nukes talking to each other.
No. There are wars which are tragic and difficult on a local basis, and then there are wars which are civilization ending or has that potential. Obviously, global thermonuclear warfare has high potential to end civilization, perhaps permanently, but certainly, to severely wound and perhaps set back human progress by to the Stone Age or something. I don't know. Pretty bad. Probably scientists and engineers want to be super popular after that as well. They're like, you got us into this mess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So generally, I think we obviously want to prioritize civilizational risks over things that are painful and tragic on a local level, but not civilizational.
How do you hope the war in Ukraine comes to an end? And what's the path, once again, to minimizing human suffering there?
Well, I think that what is likely to happen, which is really pretty much the way it is that something very close to the current lines will be how a ceasefire or truce happens. But, you just have a situation right now where whoever goes on the offensive will suffer casualties at several times the rate of whoever's on the defense. Because you've got defense in depth, you've got minefields, trenches, anti-tank defenses. Nobody has air superiority because the anti-aircraft missiles are really far better than the aircraft. Like, there are far more of them. And so neither side has air superiority. Tanks are basically death traps, just slow moving, and they're not immune to anti-tank weapons. So you really just have long range artillery and infantry trenches. It's World War I all over again with drones. Throwing little drones, some drones there,
which makes the long range artillery just that much more accurate and better, and so more efficient at murdering people on both sides.
Yeah. So it's whoever is. You don't want to be trying to advance from either side, because the probability of dying is incredibly high. So in order to overcome defense in depth trenches and minefields, you really need significant local superiority in numbers. Ideally combined arms, where you do a fast attack with aircraft, a concentrated number of tanks, and a lot of people. That's the only way you're going to punch through a line. And then you're going to punch through and then not have reinforcements just kick you right out again. I mean, I really recommend people read World War I warfare in detail. It's rough. I mean, the sheer number of people that died there was mind-boggling.
And it's almost impossible to imagine the end of it that doesn't look like almost exactly like the beginning, in terms of what land belongs to who and so on. But on the other side of a lot of human suffering, death, and destruction of infrastructure.
Yes. I mean, the thing that, the reason I proposed some sort of truce or peace a year ago was because I predicted pretty much exactly what would happen, which is a lot of people dying for basically almost no changes in land, and the loss of the flower of Ukrainian and Russian youth. And we should have some sympathy for the Russian boys as well as the Ukrainian boys, because the Russian boys didn't ask to be on their front line; they have to be. So, there's a lot of sons not coming back to their parents, and I think most of them don't really have. They don't hate the other side. It's sort of like, there's this saying about, like, this saying comes from World War I. It's like young boys who don't know each other killing each other on behalf of old men that do know each other. The hell's the point of that?
So Volodymyr Zelensky said that he's not, or has said in the past, he's not interested in talking to Putin directly. Do you think he should sit down, man-to-man, leader-to-leader, and negotiate peace?
Look, I think I would just recommend, do not send the flower of Ukrainian youth to die in trenches. Whether he talks to Putin or not, just don't do that. Whoever goes on the offensive will lose massive numbers of people. And history will not look kindly upon them.
You've spoken honestly about the possibility of war between U.S. and China in the long term, if no diplomatic solution is found. For example, on the question of Taiwan and one China policy.
Right.
How do we avoid the trajectory where these two superpowers clash?
Well, it's worth reading that book on the difficult to pronounce Thucydides trap, I believe it's called. I love war history. I like inside out and backwards. There's hardly a battle I haven't read about. And trying to figure out like what really was the cause of victory in any particular case, as opposed to what one side or another claimed was the reason.
Both the victory and what sparked the war and
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Yeah. So that Athens and Sparta is a classic case. The thing about the Greeks is they really wrote down a lot of stuff. They loved writing. There are lots of interesting things that happened in many parts of the world, but people just didn't write it down. So we don't know what happened, or they didn't really write in detail. They just would say like, we had a battle and we won. And like, well, what? Can you add a bit more? The Greeks, they really wrote a lot. They were very articulate on it. They just love writing. So, and we have a bunch of that writing that's preserved. So we know what led up to the Peloponnesian War between the Spartan and Athenian alliance. And we know that they saw it coming. I mean, the Spartans didn't write. They also weren't very verbose by their nature, but they did write, but they weren't very verbose. They were terse. But the Athenians and the other Greeks wrote a lot, and they were like, and Sparta was really kind of like the leader of Greece. But Athens grew stronger and stronger with each passing year, and everyone's like, well, that's inevitable that there's going to be a clash between Athens and Sparta. Well, how do we avoid that? And they saw it coming and they still could not avoid it. So, at some point, if one group, one civilization or country or whatever exceeds another, sort of like if, the United States has been the biggest kid on the block since I think around 1890 from an economic standpoint. So the United States has been the most powerful economic engine in the world longer than anyone's been alive. And the foundation of war is economics. So now we have a situation in the case of China where the economy is likely to be 2, perhaps 3 times larger than that of the U.S. So imagine you're the biggest kid on the block for as long as anyone can remember, and suddenly a kid comes along who's twice your size.
So we see it coming.
Yeah.
How is it possible to stop? Is there let me throw something out there, just intermixing of cultures, understanding. There does seem to be a giant cultural gap in understanding of each other. And you're an interesting case study because you are an American, obviously. You've done a lot of incredible manufacture here in the United States, but you also work with China.
I've spent a lot of time in China and met with the leadership many times.
Maybe a good question to ask is, what are some things about China that people don't understand, positive, just in the culture? What's some interesting things that you've learned about the Chinese? Well,
the sheer number of really smart, hardworking people in China is incredible. There are really, if you say like, how many smart, hardworking people are there in China? There's far more of them there than there are here, I think, in my opinion. And they've got a lot of energy. So, I mean, the architecture in China that's in recent years is far more impressive than the U.S. I mean, the train stations, the buildings, the high-speed rail, everything. It's really far more impressive than what we have in the U.S. I mean, I recommend somebody just go to Shanghai and Beijing, look at the buildings, and go to, take the train from Beijing to Xi'an, where you have the terracotta warriors. China's got an incredible history, very long history. And, I think arguably in terms of the use of language from a written standpoint, sort of one of the oldest, perhaps the oldest written language. And in China, people did write things down. So Now, China historically has always been, with rare exception, been internally focused. They have not been acquisitive. They've fought each other. There have been many, many civil wars. In the Three Kingdoms War, I believe they lost about 70% of their population. So they've had brutal internal wars, like civil wars that make the U.S. Civil War look small by comparison. So I think it's important to appreciate that China is not monolithic. We sort of think of like China as this sort of one entity of one mind, and this is definitely not the case. From what I've seen, and I think most people who understand China would agree, that people in China think about China 10 times more than they think about anything outside of China. So it's like 90% of their consideration is internal.
Well, isn't that a really positive thing when you're talking about the collaboration and a future peace between superpowers? When you're inward facing, which is like focusing on improving yourself versus focusing on, quote unquote, improving others through military might.
The good news, the history of China suggests that China is not acquisitive, meaning they're not going to go out and invade a whole bunch of countries. Now, they do feel very strongly, so that's good. I mean, because a lot of very powerful countries have been acquisitive. The U.S. is also one of the rare cases that has not been acquisitive. Like after World War II, the U.S. could have basically taken over the world and any country. Like we got nukes, nobody else got nukes. We don't even have to lose soldiers. Which country do you want? And the United States could have taken over everything. At will, and it didn't. And the United States actually helped rebuild countries. So it helped rebuild Europe. Helped rebuild Japan. This is very unusual behavior, almost unprecedented. The U.S. did conspicuous acts of kindness, like the Berlin airlift. And I think, it's always like, well, America's done bad things. Well, of course, America's done bad things, but one needs to look at the whole track record. And just generally, one sort of test would be, how do you treat your prisoners of war? Or let's say, no offense to the Russians, but let's say you're in Germany. It's 1945. You got the Russian army coming on one side, and you got the French, British, and American armies coming on the other side. Who would you like to surrender to? Like, no country is like morally perfect, but I recommend being a POW with the Americans. That would be my choice very strongly.
In the full menu of POW.
Very much so. And in fact, Wernher von Braun took, a smart guy, was like, we've got to be captured by the Americans.
Yep.
And in fact, the SS was under orders to execute von Braun and all of the German rocket engineers. And they narrowly escaped their SS. They said they were going out for a walk in the woods. They left in the middle of winter with no coats. And they ran and with no food, no coats, no water. And just ran like hell and ran west. And by sheer luck, I think his brother found like a bicycle or something, and then just cycled west as fast as he could and found a U.S. patrol. So anyway, that's one way you can tell morality is where do you want to be a POW? It's not fun anywhere, but some places are much worse than others. So anyway, so I think America has been, while far from perfect, generally a benevolent force. And we should always be self-critical and we try to be better. But anyone with half a brain knows that. So I think there are, in this way, China and the United States are similar. Neither country has been acquisitive in a significant way. So that's like a shared principle, I guess. Now China does feel very strongly about Taiwan. They've been very clear about that for a long time. From their standpoint, it would be like one of the states is not there like Hawaii or something like that, but more significant than Hawaii. And Hawaii is pretty significant for us. So they view it as really that there's a fundamental part of China, the island of Formosa, not Taiwan, that is not part of China but should be. And the only reason it hasn't been is because of the U.S. Pacific Fleet.
And as their economic power grows and as their military power grows, the thing that they're clearly saying is their interest will, clearly be materialized.
Yes. China has been very clear that they will incorporate Taiwan peacefully or militarily, but that they will incorporate it from their standpoint is 100% likely.
Something you said about conspicuous acts of kindness. As a geopolitical policy, it almost seems naive, but I'd venture to say that this is probably the path forward, how you avoid most wars. Just as you say it, it sounds naive, but it's kind of brilliant. If you believe in the goodness of underlying most of human nature, it just seems like conspicuous acts of kindness can reverberate through the populace of the countries involved.
And
de-escalate.
Absolutely. So, after World War One, they made a big mistake. They basically tried to lump all the blame on Germany, and saddled Germany with impossible reparations. Really there was a lot of there was quite a bit of blame to go around for World War One, but they try to put it all on Germany, and that laid the seeds for World War Two. So it's a lot of people, well, not just Hitler, a lot of people felt wronged, and they wanted vengeance, and they got it.
People don't forget.
Yeah. You kill somebody's father, mother, son, daughter, they're not going to forget it. They will want vengeance. So after World War II, they're like, well, that Treaty of Versailles was a huge mistake in World War One. And so this time, instead of crushing the losers, we're actually going to help them with the Marshall Plan, and we're going to help rebuild Germany. We're going to help rebuild Austria and the other, Italy and whatnot. So, and that was the right move.
It does feel like there's a profound truth to conspicuous acts of kindness being an antidote to this.
Something must stop the cycle of reciprocal violence. Something must stop it, or it will, it'll never stop. Just eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, limb for a limb, life for a life, forever and ever.
To escape briefly the darkness with some incredible engineering work. XAI just released Grok AI assistant that I've gotten a chance to play with. It's amazing on many levels. First of all, it's amazing that a relatively small team in a relatively short amount of time was able to develop this close to state-of-the-art system. Another incredible thing is there's a regular mode and there's a fun mode.
Yeah, I guess I'm to blame for that one.
I wish everything in life had a fun mode.
Yeah.
There's something compelling beyond just fun about the fun mode, interacting with a large language model. I'm not sure exactly what it is because I've only had a little bit of time to play with it, but it just makes it more interesting, more vibrant to interact with the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Our our AI Grok is modeled after the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is one of my favorite books. It's a book on philosophy disguised as a book on humor. And I would say that forms the basis of my philosophy, which is that we don't know the meaning of life, but the more we can expand the scope and scale of consciousness, digital and biological, the more we're able to understand what questions to ask about the answer that is the universe. So I have a philosophy of curiosity.
There is generally a feeling like this AI system has an outward looking, like the way you are, like sitting with a good friend, looking up at the stars, like asking podhead like questions about the universe, wondering what it's all about, the curiosity you talk about. There's a sense, no matter how mundane the question I ask it, there's a sense of cosmic grandeur to the whole thing.
Well, we are actually working hard to have engineering, math, and physics answers that you can count on. So for the other sort of AIs out there, these so-called large language models, I've not found the engineering to be reliable. And the hallucination, it unfortunately hallucinates most when you least want it to hallucinate.
Yeah.
So when you ask important, difficult questions, that's when it tends to be confidently wrong. So we're really trying hard to say, okay, how do we be as grounded as possible so you can count on the results? Trace things back to physics first principles, mathematical logic. So underlying the humor is an aspiration to adhere to the truth of the universe as closely as possible.
That's really tricky.
It is tricky. So that's why, there's always going to be some amount of error, but we want to aspire to be as truthful as possible about the answers with acknowledged error. So that there was always, you don't want to be confidently wrong. So you're not going to be right every time, but you want to minimize how often you're confidently wrong. And then, like I said, once you can count on the logic as being not violating physics, then you can start to build on that to create inventions, like invent new technologies. But if you cannot count on the foundational physics being correct, obviously the inventions are simply wishful thinking, imagination land. Magic, basically.
Well, as you said, I think one of the big goals of XAI is to understand the universe.
Yes. That's our simple 3-word mission.
If you look out far into the future, do you think on this level of physics, the very edge of what we understand about physics, do you think it will make discoveries, sort of the sexiest discovery of them as we know now, sort of unifying general relativity and quantum mechanics? So coming up with a theory of everything. Do you think it could push towards that direction, almost like theoretical physics discoveries?
If an AI cannot figure out new physics, it's clearly not equal to humans, let alone nor has surpassed humans, because humans have figured out new physics. They've just physics is just understanding, deepening one's insight into how reality works, and then then there's engineering, which is inventing things that have never existed. Mm-hmm. Now, the range of possibilities for engineering is far greater than for physics, because once you figure out the rules of the universe, that's it. You've discovered things that already existed. But from that, you can then build technologies that are really almost limitless in the variety and it's like once you understand the rules of the game properly, and with current physics, we do, at least at a local level, understand how physics works very well, where our ability to predict things is incredibly good. Like quantum mechanics the degree to which quantum mechanics can predict outcomes is incredible. That was my hardest class in college, by the way. my senior quantum mechanics class was harder than all of my other classes put together.
To get an AI system a large language model to reliably be as reliable as quantum mechanics and physics is very difficult.
Yeah, you have to test any conclusions against the ground truth of reality. Reality is the ultimate judge. Like physics is the law, everything else is a recommendation. I've seen plenty of people break the laws made by man, but none break the laws made by physics.
Yeah, it's a good test, actually. If this LLM understands and matches physics, then you can more reliably trust whatever it thinks about the current state of politics in some sense.
And it's also not the case currently that even that its internal logic is not consistent. So especially with the approach of like just predicting a token, predict token, it's like a vector sum. You know, you're summing up a bunch of vectors, but you can get drift. So as those, a little bit of error adds up, and by the time you are many tokens down the path, it doesn't make any sense.
So it has to be somehow self-aware about the drift.
It has to be self-aware about the drift, and then look at the thing as a gestalt, as a whole, and say, does it have coherence as a whole? So, you know, when authors write books, that they will write the book and then they'll go and revise it, you know, taking into account, you know, all the end and the beginning and the middle, and rewrite it to achieve coherence, so that it doesn't end up in a nonsensical place.
Maybe the process of revising is what reasoning is, and then that's the process of revising is how you get closer and closer to truth. Maybe you like at least I approach it that way. You just say a bunch of bullshit first, and then you get it better. You start at bullshit, and then you get
create a draft, and then you iterate on that draft until it has coherence, until it all adds up, basically.
So another question about theory of everything, but for intelligence. Do you think there exists, as you're exploring this with XAI, creating this intelligence system, do you think there is a theory of intelligence where you get to understand what is the I in AGI and what is the I in human intelligence?
There's no I in Team America. Oh wait, there is.
No, it's going to be stuck in my head now. Yeah. There's no me and whatever. In quantum mechanics. Oh, wait. I mean, is that part of the process of discovering, understanding the universe, is understanding intelligence?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we need to understand intelligence, understand consciousness. I mean, there are some sort of fundamental questions of like, what is thought? What is emotion?
Yeah.
Is it really just one atom bumping into another atom? It feels like something more than that. So I think we're probably missing some really big things, like some really big things.
Something that'll be obvious in retrospect.
Yes.
Like there's a giant, like you put the whole consciousness, emotion.
Well, some people would call it like a soul, you know, in religion, it'd be a soul. Like you feel like you're you, right? I mean, you don't feel like you're just a collection of atoms. But on what dimension does thought exist? What dimension do emotions exist? We feel them very strongly. I suspect there's more to it than atoms bumping into atoms.
And maybe AI can pave the path to the discovery of whatever the hell that thing is.
Yeah. What is consciousness? Like when you put the atoms in a particular shape, why are they able to form thoughts and take actions and feelings?
And even if it is an illusion, why is this illusion so compelling?
Yeah.
Like
why does this illusion exist?
Yeah.
On what plane does this illusion exist?
Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder, is, you know, either perhaps everything's conscious or nothing is conscious. One of the two.
I like the former. Everything conscious just seems more fun.
It does seem more fun, yes. But we're composed of atoms, and those atoms are composed of quarks and leptons. And those quarks and leptons have been around since the beginning of the universe.
the beginning of the universe.
Right. What seems to be the beginning of the universe.
The first time we talked, you said which is surreal to think that this discussion was happening is becoming a reality. I asked you what question would you ask an AGI system once you create it, and you said, "What's outside the simulation?" is the question. And good question.
Yeah.
But it seems like with Grok, you started literally the system's goal is to be able to ask such questions, to answer such questions, and to ask such questions.
Where are the aliens?
Or the aliens?
That's one of the Fermi paradox question. A lot of people have asked me if I've seen any evidence of aliens, and I haven't, which is kind of concerning, because then I think I'd probably prefer to at least have seen some archaeological evidence of aliens. To the best of my knowledge, there is no proof. I'm not aware of any evidence of aliens. If they're out there, they're very subtle. We might just be the only consciousness, at least in the galaxy. And if you look at, say, the history of Earth, if one is to believe the archaeological record, Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Civilization, as measured from the first writing, is only about 5,000 years old. We have to give some credit there to the ancient Sumerians, who aren't around anymore. I think it was the archaic pre-cuneiform was the first actual symbolic representation, but only about 5,000 years ago. I think that's a good date for when we'd say civilization started. That's 1/1,000,000th of Earth's existence. So civilization has been around. It's really a flash in the pan so far. And why have we? Why did it take so long? For 4.5 billion years. For the vast majority of that time, there was no life, and then there was archaic bacteria for a very long time, and then you had mitochondria get captured, multicellular life, differentiation into plants and animals, life moving from the oceans to land, mammals, higher brain functions. And the sun is expanding slowly, but it will overheat. It will heat the Earth up at some point in the future, boil the oceans, and Earth will become like Venus, where no life as we know it is impossible. So if we do not become multiplanetary and ultimately go beyond our solar system, annihilation of all life on Earth is a certainty. A certainty. And it could be as little as, on the galactic timescale, 500 million years. It's a long time by human standards, but that's only 10% longer than Earth has been around at all. Mm-hmm. So if life had taken 10% longer to evolve on Earth, it wouldn't exist at all.
We got a deadline coming up.
Yeah.
Better hurry. But that said, as you said, humans, intelligent life on Earth developed a lot of cool stuff very quickly. So
yes.
It seems like becoming multiplanetary is almost inevitable, unless we destroy.
We need to do it. It's not. I mean, I suspect that there. If we are able to go out there and explore other star systems, there's a good chance we find a whole bunch of long dead one planet civilizations.
Yeah,
they never made it past their home planet.
That's so sad.
Who dynamited his way into those chambers in the first place. Allegedly found, well, he claims he found the graffiti, a piece of graffiti left by a work gang naming the pharaoh Khufu. And it's true, I've been in that chamber, and there is the cartouche of Khufu there, quite recognizable. But the dispute around it is whether that is a genuine piece of graffiti dating from the Old Kingdom, or whether Howard Vyse actually put it there himself, because he was in desperate need of money at the time. I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. Another reason why, but it's one of the reasons that Egyptologists feel confident in saying that the pyramid is the work of Khufu. Another is what is called the Wadi al-Jarf papyri, where on the Red Sea, a diary, the diary of an individual called Merer, was found, and he talks about bringing highly polished limestone to the Great Pyramid. And it's clear that what he's talking about is the facing stones of the Great Pyramid. He's not talking about the body of the Great Pyramid. He's talking about the facing stones of the Great Pyramid during the reign of Khufu. So that's another reason why the Great Pyramid is attributed to Khufu. But I think that Khufu was undoubtedly involved in the Great Pyramid, and in a big way. But I think he was building upon and elaborating a much older structure. And I think the heart of that structure is the subterranean chamber, which is 100 feet vertically beneath the base of the Great Pyramid. Anybody who suffers from claustrophobia will not enjoy being down there. You got to go down a 26-degree sloping corridor until a distance of about 300 feet. It's 100 feet vertically, but the slope means you're going to walk a distance of about, not walk, you're going to ape walk. You're almost going to have to crawl. I've learned from long experience that the best way to go down these corridors is actually backwards. If you go forward, you keep bumping your head on them because they're only 3 feet 5 inches high. You get down to the bottom, you have a short horizontal passage, and then you get into the subterranean chamber. The theory of Egyptology is that this was supposed to be the burial place of Khufu. But after cutting out that 300-foot-long, 26-degree sloping passage, a lot of which passes through bedrock, and having cut the subterranean chamber out of bedrock, gone to all that trouble, they decided they wouldn't bury him there, and they built what's now known as the Queen's Chamber as his burial chamber. But then they decided that wouldn't do either, so they then built the King's Chamber, and that's where the pharaoh is supposed to have been buried. Those Arab raiders under Caliph Mamun didn't find anything in the Great Pyramid at all.
So your idea is that the Sphinx and maybe some aspects of the pyramid were much earlier,
Yes.
and why that's important is in that case it would be evidence of some transfer of technology.
Yes.
From a much older civilization.
Yeah.
The idea is that during the Younger Dryas, most of that civilization was either destroyed or damaged, and they desperately scattered across the globe,
Seeking refuge.
and telling stories of maybe the importance of the stars,
Mm-hmm.
their knowledge about the stars,
Yeah.
and their knowledge about building and knowledge about navigation.
Mm-hmm. That's roughly the idea. So it's interesting that the ancient Egyptians have a notion of an epoch that they call Zeptepi, which is the first time. It means the first time. This is when the gods walked the earth. This is when 7 sages brought wisdom to ancient Egypt. And that is seen as the origin of ancient Egyptian civilization. There are king lists by the ancient Egyptians themselves. There are king lists that go back way beyond the first dynasty, go back 30,000 years into the past in ancient Egypt, considered to be entirely mythical by Egyptologists. But nevertheless, it's interesting that there's that reference to remote time. Now, what you also have in Egypt are what might almost be described as secret societies. The followers of Horus are one of those, specifically tasked with bringing forward the knowledge from the first time into later periods. The souls of Pe and Neken are another one of these mysterious secret society groups who are possessors of knowledge that they transmit to the future. And what I'm broadly suggesting is that those survivors of the Younger Dryas cataclysm who settled in Giza may have been relatively small in number. It's interesting that they are referred to in the Edfu building text as 7 sages.